When my mother died, leaving a house full of belongings, I found it so difficult to make choices about what to keep and what to let go of. I love belongings, and I am not well equipped to make these decisions, even on the best days. So when I was faced with this task, I struggled so much. I had to resort to a creative approach, to use the lens of curating to decide what to do with my mother's belongings. But I wanted to speak with a professional organizer, to speak with someone who does find it easy to organize physical items, who does find it fun to make decisions about these belongings, who doesn't hesitate to tell people what to do. I want to introduce you to my friend Tinka Markham Piper. She is a professional organizer, but she actually calls herself a chaos counselor. I love that. In this conversation, I ask Tinka to share her approach and how grief shows up in her work with her clients. And I ask her a bunch of questions that I think might be very relevant to you if you are also a griever who is struggling to figure out how to start, how to get unstuck, if you're feeling overwhelmed when you're dealing with the belongings and the physical items that you might be sorting through after a person has died or after a major loss. So let's listen into our conversation. I'm Charlene. I'm a grief coach, and I have a method called the Curating Grief methodology. And that's what I use with my one-to-one clients and in courses and in my speaking. And I'm excited to be talking about this topic with chaos counselor Tinka Markham Piper. And I'd love to start with just asking Tinka to tell us, why do you call yourself a chaos counselor versus a professional organizer?
Well, I wanted to first just say, Charlene, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk today. So I'm a chaos counselor because I am actually a social worker and a public health practitioner. I worked for 15 years in both fields, mainly around suicide prevention and urban epidemiology and disaster management. But then I started my business 14 years ago because I realized that I felt I could make the biggest impact with people in their homes. And so I combined my social work degree and the counseling elements, and then my public health background in terms of all the project management. So I really am like a therapist and a project manager for home. And I work along the lifespan in terms of from birth to death and all the different transitions and emotions that happen in our life. Because as we all know, stuff is not just stuff. It's much more complex and personal and loaded than just objects. So that's why I'm a chaos counselor. And I also I'm very grateful for what I do. I do it in person. I do it online. I have a monthly membership. I have support groups, and I just am constantly learning, growing, and feeling the sense of such privilege to enter people's homes and their personal lives.
Thanks for that, Tinka. So we are here to talk about grief, belongings, and emotional chaos. This is more than just stuff. As grieving people, especially, right? The belongings and items left behind are more than just belongings. They can mean so much to us. So, of course, they might be really difficult to deal with on different levels. This is a recording for the Curating Grief show, which is an audio podcast and on YouTube. I'm Charlene. If we haven't met before, I'm a certified grief coach and curator and founder of the Grief Gallery, which is my creative platform. What ties together my work is this idea of creating space for grief in a beautiful way. So creating space for grief. I think that's the only main thing that I say we have to. My work with grief often, like many of us, starts with a personal loss. My mother, Marilyn, and when she died, she left a 3,000 square foot dream house full of stuff that I, as an only child, had to figure out what to do with. And I was entirely overwhelmed. The stuff that we're talking about, things like the soy sauce in her kitchen, things like a box of Band-Aids in her bathroom, all these little everyday things that I found impossible to make decisions about. So what do you do? What do you do? I didn't have a lot of skills like this, which is why I wanted to bring Tinka on to speak about this, because I do not find it easy to throw things away. I do not find it easy to organize things. And when Tinka and I chatted, she was like, "Oh, I've always been good at this." I was like, "Tell me your ways. Tell me your ways." So when I had to sell my mother's house, I had to do it a little differently than the conventional wisdom. I had to be creative about it. I asked myself, if I were to curate an exhibition about my mother, which 100 objects would I choose to display? That's what led me to my curating grief approach, to pretend to be a curator, like an art curator or a museum curator. And that led to presenting exhibitions with my mother's belongings, with objects from my family, meaningful objects from other parts of my life. It's a way of engaging with grief through physical, tangible items. I have a book called Curating Grief, a creative guide to choosing what to keep after a loved one dies. And yes, that is a bottle of soy sauce on the front, representing the soy sauce in my mother's kitchen. And I also bring this lens of curating in my group work. I have a course called Sorting the Stuff of Life and Loss that talks about why, where we explore why is it so difficult for us? Why are these items so emotionally charged? Why might we find it really challenging to look at items even years later? And I also do this work with one-to-one clients. And that's why I want to bring on Tinka, because I think for some of us, you might also have what I experienced, where you feel very attached to items. It might be really hard for you to let things go. And when we are grieving, there's so much happening in our minds. We can have brain fog. You might be really competent in your everyday life, and then some things related to the loss you might find incredibly difficult. I do have some questions that were pre-submitted from members of both of our memberships, and we'll also let you know how you can work with us if you feel like you want more support. I think I'm really curious, how do you see grief coming up in your work as a chaos counselor?
Grief comes up in many forms. So, most prevalently, in terms of when someone loses a loved one, a family member, a friend, and reach out to me to help with grief, can also come in forms of moving, identity changes, a loss of a job, a divorce. So, I mean, there are many ways that grief comes up in this work and impacts then the way we are in our homes and just decisions that we have to make about our homes.
And do people actually name it as grief? Do they come to you and say, "I'm grieving, Tinka, I need your help as I do this"? Or do you kind of see it, and in which ways?
It really depends. I mean, I think people come feeling overwhelmed a lot of the time, so that the overwhelm presents itself first, and then as we dig deeper, then it's, as we know, grief is multifaceted. It's always evolving. It looks different for everyone. So in terms of, sometimes there's someone will come with, like frustration or anger or guilt. So it's really very different. But in terms of the grief, I think that one of the biggest things we first do is really open up that conversation and create a space to have that vulnerability to discuss, like, the emotional framework, and then the kind of the emotional goals of what we're trying to get to in the home setting.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I've been thinking too about when people come to me and they say, "I've had a storage unit for 5 years and I don't want to pay this bill anymore, but I can't bring myself to look at things," right? I often find that the experience with the physical items, with the belongings, might give us a clue into where a person's relationship is with the grief, for instance, or if there's something that needs to be untangled in terms of their relationship with their person, whether that is in therapy, whether that is in like working with a coach like me, or even in journaling. So that's interesting that there's
sounds like for you too, that oh, there's an indicator or a clue that you see.
Yes, and I think the thing on top of it is that people will reach out at different stages during the experience of a loss. So, for example, someone yesterday just reached out to me. Her 101-year-old mother just passed away. And she and her husband, all the belongings are now in the home, and her husband is really ready to move them out, and she's not ready. So, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of one of those things where it really is so individual, the experience of going through the objects and where you are in your life, basically.
Yeah. And as I shared in the introduction, my personal experience of losing my mother and having that burden of dealing with her belongings. I mean, her belongings were a burden. Now that they're much more edited down, they are a gift, right? My personal experience certainly informed that a lot. How have your personal experiences with loss and grief informed the way that you approach dealing with the physical items and the decluttering that people might come to you for?
Well, I'm a very sentimental person. Like often people think I'm a minimalist because of the work that I do, but I'm really sentimental. I get very attached to objects. I'm more on the maximalist side of things. And so I was always quite a collector as a child. And then my father took his own life when I was 17. And so that was the, first experience and obviously a major experience I had with loss at a young age. And so the process of seeing my mom and myself and my younger brother move through his belongings over the years. And then later, my beloved grandparents and an incredible stepfather, my aunts. So there have been sort of many moments in my life where I had the personal connection to losing loved ones and then the processing of belongings and deciding what will be kept and what's being moved on has really sort of then helped me in my professional life in terms of working with clients who are going through, similar experiences. So in each stage, I would say that each experience is that, as I know, that we're all sort of in different stages, right, of our grief. Some might be very new, some might have, it be more time has passed. And as we all know, because it's constantly an evolving experience, that there's nothing about, a certain amount of time that means that you should be at a certain place with processing. But I would say that for me, it's over the years that as I've had more distance, I've been able to sort of let go of more items.
Thank you for that, Tinka, and for sharing your personal experience too, and for naming the range of experiences that we all have. Our circumstances of our losses are going to be so different, even if there's similarities, right? So, Tinka, you losing your father as a young person is just even a logistical level and responsibility level different than my experience of losing my mother when I was in my mid 30s as an adult. So some of you might be official executors, some of you might just be the responsible ones that have been left with the tasks. Some of you, your challenge might be that you don't actually have access. Someone might be withholding access. You might not have access maybe because of geographical distance. There are so many factors that go into our experiences of grief after major loss, including how resourced we are, including emotional resources, whether we have therapists, whether we have supportive friends or community, whether we have logistical support, like being able to afford movers or to hire a dumpster or to hire a storage unit. So I want to acknowledge that range of losses and the range of experiences we might have. So Tinka, like I had over a year, I threw a lot of money at my mother's house to try to keep it. Couldn't, but also threw a lot of money at a storage unit, burned through some of her retirement savings that she never got to use on that. And I know that's a privilege to be able to do that. So when someone comes to you and says, I have a month to clear out this home and everything feels so hard, where do I even start? What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, my take is very much that in terms of like, we often have to start smaller than we think because the task can feel so daunting and so many parts of it. So I'm a very big list maker. And so that's the first thing that we'll do together is sort of like a brain download of all the different things that have to happen in terms of maybe there are administrative logistical aspects, maybe there's more communicative things, maybe there's more like processing of stuff or arranging for movers or whatever it might be. So the first thing that we do together is really do a list. And then from there, we prioritize, what things really have to happen at first. And in terms of identifying what might be some of the small low-hanging fruit that we can start doing to feel a sense of momentum and some progress. Because what happens, as we all know, with grief is that, it's very exhausting. It's a sense of fogginess and lack of energy. It can present that way. And so, really thinking through then, like, how do we look at the time frame that we have and how do we create something that feels manageable, steady, et cetera. And then from there, it's then assessing in terms of what are the other resources that we can call on. And I think you did a really lovely job of explaining that we all are coming from very different, everyone's situation is so different in terms of who you've lost, the circumstances, the emotional, the relationship you had with the person that you lost, what support you might have or not have. So then from there, then we will look at those resources and try to see whether, there are other people who can get involved, whether that's family members or friends. And I mean, that can add a whole nother level of complication, right? When other family members maybe have different opinions about where to start or what to do. So it's really just like a mapping process that we do together, just to start to feel there's a little bit more control over the situation and identifying like what are the really priorities and the essential things versus what are things that can happen later. So that's kind of, I'm a big list maker. I mean, as an anxious person, lists have always helped my anxiety. It's always made me feel, yes, exactly, right? Like, hello, notebooks. So yeah,
We are notebook people.
we are.
Yes. And I mean, definitely, I think the first thing I did when I found out my mother had died was to make a list. It was my way of coping. And as I learned about things like grieving styles, right, you might find this too, that some of us might be tend more toward emotional processors, where we might be more comfortable crying, expressing emotions, talking about emotions. Some of us might be spreadsheet makers, right, binder carriers. And I definitely went there. But again, it clashed up against like, oh my God, I am so overwhelmed.
Mhm.
So I love that you named starting with a list.
Mhm.
And yes, I find that too. When I do projects, whether it's exhibitions or trying to clear certain spaces, when I tackle the storage unit, for instance, which was, gosh, like 8 years after I sold my mother's house, I found that I had to make a plan A, like the ideal plan,
Yes.
and then like plan B. Oh, and if I don't make that, plan C. Is that kind of what you recommend as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is where, phrases like it's good enough or not now, right? That these are things that it's important to sort of know that, yes, we may have the plan A and then a secondary one and a tertiary one, and to really then think through like we can hold them all we can hold them all, yet the key is really then like which is the one that creates a sense of like movement and momentum, and that is the one that feels the most right given your situation.
Yeah. And taking into account things like how do you deal with factors with helpful family members or opinionated people, even
Yeah.
people who are formerly estranged who might be coming out of the woodwork and suddenly having opinions.
Yes. Well, and I think what's hard is that, I mean, is that where you have already a loss, and then you might have the repercussions of the relationships around the family that then create a different form of loss or a different form of other emotions in terms of stress or anger or disagreement around the belongings. So that then there's like another level of grief, or that becomes sort of redirected towards the different ways that happen in a family. I mean, that's something that can be so hard and delay the grief because you're dealing with, all this other
Yeah, we're troubleshooting, we're just managing.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. I find that a lot with my one-to-one work with grief coaching clients, where sometimes we are talking about the person who died and we're talking about the relationship with the person and the grief around losing the person. And especially if someone is dealing with an estate or a home, just as often we are talking about the people who are still alive
Hmm.
and the conflicts that might come up, the family dynamics or relationship dynamics that might be enhanced. I don't think that's quite the word I meant, exacerbated
Yeah.
by the different ways we grieve, our different approaches to dealing with this stuff. So,
Yes,
yeah.
and similarly, I mean, I've had many cases where I have like clients I'm working with where, someone in the family is like, we have to get rid of everything fast and like it's out of here. We got to sell the house or, move the things out. And then others who want to take more time to go through things. Sometimes there might be, an adult child who then feels kind of like, wait, my mom or my dad got rid of everything and I didn't have a chance to go through it. And now I wish I had a couple of items for my mom or my dad, and other people who feel like they kept everything and now I have to go through it. So it's again, as we all know, it's so personal, each of our experiences really. And yeah, it's a lot. And
It's it is a lot.
yeah.
And if you've been to my events before, I like to weave in different parts of like grief education throughout because it's so important, right? That like we're all smart people, we have educations, and we're not taught about grief.
Mhm.
So I think part of what we want to say when we make space for grief is making space for all of those emotions that come along with it. When you're encountering these piles of physical items and physical stuff, so much is also the piles of emotional stuff.
Yeah.
So definitely there's grief,
Mhm.
and there can be anger, there can be resentment, there can be guilt, there can be regret. All of that can be in there as you're uncovering and looking at things and grieving. And I'd also like to name that you can grieve any of these aspects that Tinka has named. That you can grieve, I wish I had had more time to look through the things. I wish I had the ability to keep those items. I wish I hadn't made that choice. I wish that these siblings had come together instead of falling apart. That you can grieve any and all of that. Yeah.
And I think too with objects is often we'll think about, oh, this is the cutlery that was used or the favorite photograph or these objects. But what I will do in a home is we'll sort and we'll decide around the emotional part of the items, so that in terms of just sort of we'll create spaces that maybe say, these are the items that elicit the good memories and the joy, right? Those are those. And then these are the ones that feel guilty, or these are the ones that feel complicated. So that sometimes using a different framework than just sorting items, but sorting by emotions can be a way to helpfully release. These ones are too hard right now. I can't make decisions about them. It's often then thinking about like the emotional guide to decision making as opposed to just objects and making decisions only on like the actual thing.
Are you actually saying that like people should be picking things up individually? Because it's like we pick something up and oh my God, there's so much attached to this, and then we set
Yes.
it down. And
Well, and that's
then
the thing is it's like the incredible decision paralysis that happens, right? Because it's so much to process. And so that's why in terms of like the example that I was using was more like in terms of that sometimes, when you're going through things, you might come across things that are just too hard to process. And so that, I mean, I usually, we're going through, we'll have a complicated feelings, things that need a little bit more time to go through, or we'll add the different boxes of like the emotions and drop things in. But for me, it's really like, always starting with like the sort of the more neutral, the easier items in a home. And that often, can be a bathroom or a kitchen or, spaces that maybe are, but except if you have someone who loves to cook, then those items are the most important. You know what I mean? So it's really again, I keep using this that it's so personal, but it really, really is. But I think that when I start with working in a home, a lot of it is the conversation on, what is the overall goal? Like, are we keeping a certain, what are we keeping? What are we letting go of? What are we donating? Maybe they're selling, maybe there might be things that have to go into the trash. So it's really kind of coming up with a framework and then a process that I use to help people move through the belongings.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think this is part of the reason I appreciate your approach and that we have this really beautiful overlap on that we know it's more than just stuff.
Yeah.
And there's the emotional wellness, mental wellness that overlaps and connects so much with the physical items. And we also wanted to ask a question about what if you don't have the time pressure?
Mhm.
In my Sorting the Stuff of Life and Loss course, I find it really interesting because we have quite a number of widows where there is not a time pressure because they were able to stay in the house after their partner died. So
Mhm.
it's not like there is a time constraint. That means like, oh, we need to make progress, we need to make decisions. How do we get moving when there isn't necessarily a time constraint? But sometimes I think the time constraint, I probably would have kept my mom's house forever if I
Yeah.
didn't run out of money and have to sell it.
I get that. I really, really, that resonates so much. And I think, in terms of like, as we talked about like what happens when there is a time constraint, but then, when there isn't a time constraint, I mean, again, I think it is one of those things where it's so individual. And I've had many widows in my support groups that I run where, the question is that they feel like their family members are the ones saying, you really should go through the office, or like, why aren't you sleeping back in the bedroom again? Like, it's been X amount of time, like it's time to move on. And for me, I'm just like, that is, your decision, and it's really up to you in terms of like your timeline. And sometimes it can be helpful to keep things as they are. And other times that can then make it harder to move through the grief, right? So it's really, again, I mean, I don't mean to sound like to everyone here, I don't mean to sound a broken record that it's so personal, but it is so personal. And you really have to sort of know what works for you. And I think the thing about it is what happens though is that sometimes in a home, and this is not just homes and with grief, but homes in general, if we look around, sometimes our homes are very past oriented and future oriented, right? We have a lot of objects or things about the past, and then a lot of aspirational items for the future, but really thinking about what's supporting my present life right now. And I think that that's often too when you've lost someone, and thinking about what is your present life now, and is your home set up in a way to support that, or is it too much focused on the past and too much focus on the future, so that you're not able to live well now? So yes, I mean, I think that's what I would say.
I love the way you've described that, right? Is your home past oriented or future oriented, or even now oriented, how you live your life now? And is it set up to support that?
Yes,
Because
and I
I,
think
yeah,
well, think about like our clothes, like a clothes closet. I mean, hello, I have those clothes. I'm like, one day I'm gonna fit back into them. You know what I mean? Or, oh, these were so fun to wear. And it's the same thing where like, okay, those clothes I really should, I mean, again, I should take my own advice and I need to move those out. But then sort of thinking about a home as well is, and not at all, like I am so not about erasing someone's memory at all. I mean, I think that it's really, like for me, it's been so important to hold on. Like I wear my grandmother's necklace every day. I have like my stepfather's jacket and hat that still smell like him, that I love so much after all these years. So it's one of those things where it's not about at all erasing, but it's thinking about what is the amount that feels right, so you can remember and you can feel connected, but it's not that it's just that you're able to have a life now that feels, yeah. So that's how
yeah. No, I think that aligns so well with how I think of it too, where it's about how do we want to live our life now? How do we want to live our lives moving forward? That I think there's often an aspect of reclaiming. So my word for 2026, one of them is reclaim,
yeah.
but it's also one of my favorite aspects of my curating grief approach, that it does offer reclaiming, that there's reclaiming agency, right? As grieving people who have experienced major loss, whether it was losing a job, whether it was experiencing the death of a loved one, we've experienced so much out of our control.
Mhm.
When we can make choices about the physical belongings, when we can make choices about what's in our homes now, it's a way of reclaiming agency
Mhm.
in so many ways about reclaiming space, right?
Yes.
Physical space, emotional space, head space.
Yeah, which are so connected, right? In terms of just to be able to have the physical space for the emotional space to happen. Because what happens is that in a home, it's like having all these tabs open where we're looking around saying, that's a project I have to do, or those are things I have to process, or that reminds me, you know what I mean? So it's sort of figuring out like how many tabs are really, make sense to have open so that you can then have the emotional space. Because as you say, like is totally connected. And sometimes, in a home where we'll just clear a little bit of a space, like we'll clear a side table or like a kitchen counter and just clearing a little bit, it just makes a big difference. Or, I've been in homes where we have like created altars for someone who's passed away, or have like designated like one room in the house where we really sort of make it beautiful with the objects. So it's really, again, there are many ways to be able to like remember, celebrate, be without it. Again, like it can feel so overwhelming that wherever you go, it's just, you just feel like it's loss, 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 loss. And then how do you then keep the loss, know that it's evolving over time, but how your home can support you through that process.
Yeah. I think reclaiming space can show up in all these different ways. I remember one of my mentors, she kind of said, for instance, if you had hospice, if you had home hospice,
Mhm.
you might associate a certain room when it was the room that held the bed, the
Yeah.
hospital bed. So it sounds like you're describing processes where you're making these deliberate choices in your space that helps you to reclaim that space in a different way.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, that's a really lovely way of putting it. And I think about, that my stepfather who passed away in the kind of main family room, and that space became a reminder of him dying in that space, and then how to kind of reinvigorate it so that it was, still a family room holding very much his memories, his side table, his chair that we kept, but moving it into sort of like a new stage in the home.
Tinka, what do you do if you get stuck? You start and you open that box of emotional landmines and you're like, No, I'm stuck." Do you push through? What do you do?
Well, I think that when you get stuck, it's a moment of information. So it's a moment of saying, what's happening? What's going on? Is this something that I need to stop doing and move and redirect? Is this something that I need to push through a little bit more? And I think that, yeah, like it's very much sometimes that we do need to just sort of keep on going and move through it. And other times we have to say, like, this is not a time for decision making. This is a time maybe for containment, right? This is a time for grouping, for sorting, as opposed to for decisions. Or if you need stuck, there's a way to take a time out, or like a time away from it, and transition to another space or a different type of task, or bring someone in. But for me, it's really just thinking about like that is an information point. It doesn't mean that you're going to be stuck forever. It doesn't mean that you can't do any of the tasks that are there for you. It's just that this is the one for right now that's presenting as especially hard. And that's where I will then sort of tap into, like, if I'm working with someone and this happens, it's like, okay, let's quickly just check in with each other. What is the emotion that's happening? What is going on that feels this is the stuckness? Is it that you're afraid you're going to make a decision that you're going to regret? Is it that need to cry and that's what we need to do right now? Right? Is it that we need to just go outside? So it's really just knowing that like that moment of stuckness is just part of the process. Like it's going to happen. It really is part of the process.
I know you do home visits where even in person, you'll go to someone's home or even through Zoom. Do you like sit there and cry with someone? Or not you crying, but be there while someone cries?
Yeah, so I mean, I have a toolkit that I bring to every home, and I always bring Kleenex and chocolate and coffee, right? Because that's for me, like I only started drinking coffee at 40, so I'm like making up for lost time because I don't know what I was not drinking coffee for 40 years or what 30 years, 20 years. So anyway, and I'm a big chocolate fan and Kleenex. So like if that's what we need to do, that's what we need to do. I mean, I'm a crier. I know that it can be hard to do, but it can be so helpful. And that sometimes we just need that to be the work that we're doing to be able then to be like, okay, like let's redirect or let's keep going now that we've been able to shed a little bit. Yes, I will definitely sit next to someone, hold their hand if they want. Sometimes I will cry as well. I mean, with anyone that I work with in person or Zoom, I mean, it's really, there's that deep personal connection because I'm being, invited into probably the most personal moments of their life, right? Is that their grief. Like there's nothing more personal and connective than grief.
So universal, so personal. I mean, personal is going to keep on coming up because it is, right? And yes, I think I imagine that we both do a lot of validating, of normalizing, of like, you are not crazy because you are crying over a pair of socks.
Mhm.
You are not alone at still having a box in the basement that it's like, I don't want to actually open it. Right. And I think for me, what you're naming too is like honoring what comes up for us, honoring the roles that these items play for us. Like, oh, this represents this. Someone's named witnessing, that sometimes we might keep something because there are stories attached to it and we want to have a witness to the stories. Absolutely. And if you're one of these people who would like to share the items that you're like, here is the random book that looks like
Mhm.
any other book, but is the most precious book to me because it has their handwriting in it. I hold a free monthly gathering for my creative platform, The Grief Gallery, which is on Zoom last Wednesday of every month. And we pretend that we're meeting in an imaginary gallery space, and you are invited to bring a meaningful object. You could hold it up to the camera, or you can just tell the story of it, because that's what we're doing. We're inviting you to share something for us to collectively witness, and not just as a random item, but as an item that is important to you. And you get to tell us, why is it important? What do you want us to know about the person? So I want to invite that too. And sometimes I find when we do that, sometimes people say, huh, okay, cool, that's what I needed. Like, I don't actually need to keep the book anymore. I just needed someone to see me as a griever, to see the person I lost, and to see them the way I see them. So I'll also offer that too, right? Tinka said, right now it might feel impossible to let something go, and it might shift.
Yeah. And I think that often what will happen is that in telling the story, like I love what you just said, in telling the story, there's a release of the object. There's a bit of like needing that permission slip to say, like, okay, I have now connected this object to the person I'm mourning and to you, and now I can release it. Or maybe I can't, and I want to keep it. And the thing is, I find what I love so much about this work and working with grief is the stories that I get to hear and finding the objects that are the most meaningful. There was a project I worked on, and we were looking and looking and looking for her mother's slippers. And they were worn down to the bones, but those slippers were the most important thing that her daughter wanted more than anything. And it was just this sense of such joy and triumph when we finally found them, because it was a room just, understandably just boxes and boxes. And I think we found it sort of at the end. And we both just, did this hurrah and hugged each other like the slippers were there. And we put them right next to her, by her bedside table so she could have them. And so then this is a thing, is that often it is these like quotidian objects that are the most important because they remind us the most deeply of the person we've lost. And having been to the grief gathering on that you hold every month, like I love it. I really think it's such an important, special space. And I think that it's like we keep our loved ones alive as well by sharing their objects and their stories. And as much as sometimes I'll find in homes that will kind of store away things that belong to, those who are grieving, as opposed to integrating them into our daily lives and using them, like use the use the china or wear the clothes, or, make them part of your life if that's what feels right. And just one other thing I want to say, Charlene, is a question I always get, which is, how much should I keep? How much should I let go? And I love that, in terms of the work you do around curating and this idea, when you create a framework, it can be very helpful for people. But I had this very special experience where I was visiting a friend of mine, and we were talking about her father who had passed away. And she said, "Do you want to meet my dad?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, of course." And she brought out this small box, and it had 5 things in it. It had a photograph, a Post-it note, a recipe, and 2 letters that he wrote to her. And just in those 5 objects, we sat on the couch and we went through them together. And in 5 objects, I got a sense of her father, their connection, his essence. And it was so moving to me because it was such a reminder that it's not the quantity of what we keep, but it's the choices that we make, and that there's no number, right? There's no like amount. And like, unfortunately, and I say this with like pain for, all of us, that we can't bring them back physically here, but we can keep them emotionally, connected here. And that it really, it doesn't have to be about keeping everything or letting go of everything. It's really figuring out that balance.
It's not binary. It's not you need to keep it or you need to toss it. There's so much in between. And I think giving ourselves some permission to do that, to see the range of choices available. I love that example that you shared, right? It's it's like a mini exhibition in 5 objects. It's a curation. And when I say curate, I just define curate as choosing with intention. So you don't feel like you need to be artistic, you don't need to be necessarily creative, you don't need access to a gallery space. To me, it's choosing with intention what goes into your spaces and what you keep. And as you've described it, if that person had just kept everything, all the boxes, unsorted, unvisited, they probably would not have been able to draw out those particular items to create that beautiful box.
Yeah. Yes, and I think that in the letting go, right? In the process of the letting go, it's another way to process the emotions too, right? Where it's like the letting go can create a relief. It can create like a movement forward, right? It can create like it can shift the grief. And so that in itself is the physical act creates an emotional change. Just the way when we clear the space, it creates an emotional change. The letting go, the moving out creates a shift inside.
Yeah. I find so many parallels in terms of what I see with clients and with people that I talk to when it comes to the belongings with how we talk about grief, right? In the way that, as I said earlier, if someone's kind of like, oh my God, it's a Pandora's box, that room, or that actual physical box, that's probably a clue that there's an aspect of grief for their emotions that also feel like a Pandora's box. And if someone's like, I don't actually have anything, right, of theirs in my space because it's just too painful, like that's, and maybe an indicator as well. And as grieving people, you might also experience this similarity too, where have you had people, giving you opinions of like, are you still grieving? It's been 2 years. Or as Tinka named, it's been so long. Haven't you cleared out the closet yet? You might find these kind of parallel experiences, whether it's someone commenting on where we should be with our grief or where we should be with the physical items.
Yeah, and I mean, I have had experiences where, it was 10 years before a widow could sleep back in the bedroom again, right? That's fine. I couldn't look at a photo of my dad for a year. Like, I could not see his face for 1 year because it was so heartbreaking to me. For other people, they really felt like they wanted to sort of do it more quickly to be able to move forward. So it's really, again, I think the word of our conversation is personal. And but it is, again, so individual.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think too is that we have to sort of then think about like, what are the parts of help that we need at different times? And I think that can be an awkwardness. People who haven't experienced grief or who haven't lost someone, not knowing how to always, help or be supportive. Or since we have to like teach people and educate them about what we need and what we don't need. So
Yeah.
I think
I
that's
always Yeah, no, thank you for naming that. And I'm laughing because I always talk about my husband in my talks and in my book. And it's often in the context of like how we just clashed. Where I'm like, he is brilliant if you need to Tetris all the boxes to fit. Not so great at understanding why it was so difficult for me to clear up my mother's house. So you might find that in your lives too, that some people are better suited to support you in one way and not as much in the other ways, and that there can be grief around that as well. He's lovely. Well, we're doing great now. But
yeah, good. Good.
um, I do have a question about, so I have a feeling like people in your world and people in my world are very caring people. Like they want to do good things in the world. And something I often hear is, okay, like I've identified some things that I can donate, but I want them to go to the best places. Like I want to make sure that someone can use it. And I've noticed that that can get in the way of actually releasing items. How do you approach that?
Yes, I mean, I think the thing about it is that there can be such good intentions that we have of wanting to make sure that objects move out of the home in a thoughtful, purposeful way and have like a next destination that feels good, right? Like if you have someone who, loved books, you want to make sure that the books are going to like a library or a school or wherever, but it's not always possible. And that in terms of having so many destinations of where things go and keeping things just to be able to find the right landing spot can then block things leaving. I know there's often like this joke about like I put things in the back of my car and I drove around with them for 6 months kind of thing, right? So that there are times where just letting go is enough, in terms of you may not find the exact place that you want them to go, but if you can find a place for them to go, ideally there are going to be people who are able to use and love and people who need the items. So, often that's something that we'll work on together. Like when we make that first list, we'll talk about like the destinations of things. What are the donation options? What are the options for maybe it might be also selling, also thinking about family members. I mean, often we think we keep things for our family members and they don't want them. And we do all this work to preserve and to make thoughtful decisions and say, here's all the stuff for you. And they don't want it. So I had shared with you, I was working with a woman who was terminally ill. And she, in the last couple of months of her life, she really wanted to go through her house and make decisions about what to keep, especially for her 3 grown children. And so we did that painstakingly together. Like she was in the bed and I brought things in and we went through decisions and made, 3, like a room full of all these, very organized. And her 3 kids came to say goodbye and didn't want anything. And she was heartbroken, right? And I was heartbroken for her too, because she had kept all these things for 40, 45 years and her children then said no. I mean, that's a whole nother thing of where then I felt frustrated, angry anyway, I think you know where I'm going with this, but at the same time, it was just also this reminder of, yeah, it's really, we often will keep things for other people, or we'll give things to other people after someone has passed away and they don't want them. So then being ready to deal with that and sort of understand that process.
Yeah, in my curating grief work, oh, and that's such a heartbreaking story.
Mm.
And I think it's one of the hard truths that we experience as grieving people. I mean, we experience many hard truths. But in my curating grief work, we talk a lot about meaning. Like, yes, meaning making, as we've kind of described, of making meaning out of someone's life, making meaning out of the items, making meaning out of our own lives, but also the hard truth that what is incredibly precious to us might be meaningless to someone else.
exactly, that our own stories and the stories of others who we have had relationships with are not the same stories as others. And then this, because the stories and the objects go together like this, we think we're passing along a story, but to someone else, we're passing around something that they really don't care about.
Yeah.
Um,
You're trying to communicate, I care about you and I love you and I hope you'll remember your grandpa.
mhm.
And they receive, here's some clutter for your studio apartment.
Exactly. Here's a large piece of furniture, a 5 set piece of bedroom furniture for your studio apartment. So, yeah,
Yeah, these crossed wires and misunderstandings and differences. Yeah, if any of you are experiencing this, a lot of love. It's difficult. And I also just wanted to name too that like we're all just doing the best we can.
yeah.
And I think besides saying personal a lot, I think we're talking about capacity, right? Like what resources do you have? I often talk about the winter coats in my mother's closet because she had bought 5 beautiful black wool winter coats the winter she died. Like she loved a sale, so they were a bargain if she had lived, right? But I was like, oh, mom, like 5 beautiful coats. You clearly thought you were going to live for a long time. So I wanted to donate those coats to a good place. And I tried to look up the best place. And then I got lost in Connecticut for hours trying to find this place to donate it to. And I'm not very good at driving. I'm not very comfortable driving. And after that, I was said, okay, we can't do that with all of her clothes. Like, I don't have the capacity to risk life and limb, to spend hours trying to do everything perfectly. So we're often just doing the best we can.
I'm glad that you brought up the word capacity because I like to talk about capacity and capability together because in terms of, we may be capable of doing things, but do we have the capacity for them? And that with grief impacts our capability and it changes our capacity. So just knowing that, I feel like the capacity is like the kinder word to think about, because there's a lot of shoulds that can happen when we're doing this work. Like I should be able to make these decisions. I should be able to do this faster. I should. And I find that looking at that expectation, knowing that grief changes our capacity and our capability is like an important thing to hold in this process of decision making.
Yeah, because sometimes I find a curious phenomenon where we actually add to our expectations of ourselves when we're actually least equipped to do it. I'm going to create the most beautiful altar when I can't even remember where I put my keys because I'm in such a brain fog. I did have a question that a client submitted ahead of time. If you are dealing with a house and you are trying to select items, curate items to bring to your own house, do you recommend, this is like a logistical technical question, do you recommend like doing them as you go or like having a little staging area at the house and setting aside your things and then at the end, like when you sell the house, for instance, then you bring it all over?
I think it's so individual, really both work. I've had cases where we start to bring things over to start to incorporate the items into the home. And other times where we wait to sort of look at the volume and reassess and say, does this volume make sense for the home? So they both can work. And also what happens is as we go through things, sometimes we'll say, I want to keep this, but then as we continue to find more things, we then start to replace some of the things that we kept with the new things so that in a way containing things all together gives you kind of like an overall sense because we can then forget like, oh, did I already bring over a lamp or two? Like maybe I don't need these, so that being able to kind of see the full volume can be very helpful, before you then bring to your own home. But again, it's logistics, it's capacity, it's all those things.
That's a great consideration because you're right. Yeah, I could definitely, I mean, I was living an ocean away when my mother died. So it was a little bit of a combination. but I could, if I lived in the same town or area, I could see, oh, I have kept 20 cardigans. Okay, let me see that all together.
If I did bring 3 books, I mean, I have many, many books that I love that I share, but I wanted
Awesome.
just to share 2 books that I will bring to someone's home when we're doing this work. And there, 2 of them are very just simple books that I love. That one is called "It's Okay to Feel Things Deeply" by Carissa Potter, and it's just a very beautiful short book that I really, really love about grief and loss. The other one is an artist named Alexandra Alanow. I used to have a plan. She also has one that's called, you probably have it. She also has one just on grief. And these are just beautiful reads. So those 2 I really love. And then this is an also book that I know has become like a bestseller, but The General Art of Swedish Death Cleaning is also a very moving book written by someone in their 80s. And yeah, it's a really lovely book. So I'm a big book person. I think you are as well. So I'm constantly always, bringing books to people's homes and sharing passages.
Thank you for that. And I was laughing when you showed the I used to have a plan book because it's in a stack on my bookcase on top of a book called The Life Plan.
Mm.
And then above it, I used to have a plan.
Perfect. That
Before
sounds
my
like,
mom died, after my mom died,
yes.
and we can make new plans. I just wanted to name some of the books. So They Left Us Everything, a memoir by Canadian writer Plum Johnson, a funny, sad book about dealing with parents who decline in their stuff. Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant by cartoonist Roz
Oh,
Chast.
love Ross Chast. She just nails it every time with the humor, but also just like the deep emotional intellect.
So we've talked about the little things, right? The toothbrushes, the socks, the winter coats. What if you inherit big things like real estate or, like a collection of artwork that suddenly it's like, oh, there are all these other considerations. Do you work with people who are dealing with those too?
So with real estate, yes, I've had experiences with real estate where it's making decisions about property and homes and what to do. And that's where, especially if there are, multiple family members involved, it can get challenging because there are different opinions about keeping the family home or keeping, whatever it might be in terms of for the memories or for an investment or for like future, that is like a whole nother level of decision making. And often then like I will then call in, for example, like a realtor in the area to sort of sit down with the family and really discuss like the different options. Like I like to bring professionals in because I'm not like, in terms of that the property of the real estate, like I can advise on the emotional level, but in terms of the practical level, then it's important to have those conversations as well. And then when it comes to things like collections and paintings, my brother's an archivist. He's quite well connected in the art world. So I will usually draw on him and say, do you have someone who I can connect this person to figure out? But I love bringing in outside people who have expertise in different areas. Sometimes like someone will have a lot of antiques and they'll need to know, is it worth it to keep them, sell them? And so then I'll connect them to someone in the antiquarian world. So it's really just about finding the people who can give the best kind of advice to help with that form of the decision making. And I like to treat them as, when we make the list, I like to sort of see those as separate projects, right? Like there's an art project. Okay, that's something. There's a car that needs to get sold. That's a separate project. So that really like, parsing it out, sort of like that, like I call in decluttering, I call it a declutter snack. When I'm working in a home, right? And so then with like grief, it's not really a snack because it's so much, but like this idea of like these separate macro projects and really seeing them as such as opposed to this one big thing.
We
Because it
need
is
snacks.
big. We all need snacks. Thank goodness we need many, many snacks.
I ate so much chocolate pudding at my mom's house because it's like my comfort food. It's my like when I was sick, my mom would buy me chocolate pudding. So I would treat myself to chocolate pudding at her house just to get myself by. So yay for snacks.
Paper snacks. Well, and you know this, Charlene, from my monthly program, is that for me, it's all about when we do this work, we have to create the conditions. Even if it is something that's so hard and painful, we have to create conditions around us to make it as supportive as possible. So like when I go into a home, when someone's lost someone, not only do I bring chocolate, coffee, Kleenex, I'll often bring a candle that will light as a memory of the person whose objects we're going through, or as a memory. So like, whether it's like having a candle, having music, having food near you, like planning something nice to do after you do the decision making and the going through objects, like really bookending the experience and the actual experience to sort of see it as like, how do I take care of myself or take care of other people doing this work? Because it is so hard.
It's incredibly hard. So it's like in all the ways that we, as you said, create the conditions to support ourselves through it. And yes, thank you for naming like the outside experts, because and I do love that you separate them out into different projects, right? It's not like in the same moment we're going to decide what to do with the leftover pasta in the kitchen cupboard, and then you're going to figure out what to do with the world-class art collection. It's a whole other scale of research and consideration. So if you are dealing with belongings, for instance, we need to know, it's very important, who actually has legal ownership of an item, right? Even if we have opinions about it, even though we really want access to it, who actually has legal ownership? When it comes to questions of probate and estate, it's so specific to country, region, state. They all have different processes. So, like, you want to talk to someone who knows the rules where that person's estate is.
Yeah.
And I'll also add another thing about artwork. Like, I think, again, this is another one of the difficult things for us where we're like, well, but this meant so much to them. Surely this is worth lots of money. And then we try to sell it on eBay and we're like, oh, yeah, no, actually, no one's going to give me the money for that. And then we go back to what is my capacity? Do I have all the hours and energy in order to figure this out? It's a very difficult time for museums right now, especially in the United States, where I'm from, where funding is getting cut, staff is getting cut. So even museums that might seem like the perfect recipients for things that you want to donate, they might not have capacity. Everyone needs to consider capacity and resources, including museums. And I do like to use these metaphors of exhibitions and galleries and museums with my clients. So I just want to extend that metaphor for you of even museums have limits to what they can take. Museums have collections. So, right, like big museum in Toronto, big museum in New York, they might be way better funded than we do. They have a lot more storage space than we do in our houses. And there's still limits. They have to decide what they keep. They sometimes have to remove things from their collections because it no longer makes sense in their life. And they might no longer have the resources to maintain and like keep up and clean that item. Or, as we talked about earlier, about making space for what we actually want, there might be another item that they want to bring into their collection that better suits their overall purpose. And I think that extends to us too as individuals. That it's like, oh, those boxes of their precious collection in my basement, actually, that space, I'm going to reclaim that space for what I actually want, right? I'm going to reclaim that storage room and make it my writing room, my art room, because that's actually what I want to do with my space right now.
And that gets back to the like looking at your home and what is past, present, versus now in the space.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, this question about estate as well, of how do you deal with being forced to sell everything in the estate of a close loved one because there are multiple distant/unfriendly heirs waiting for their cut?
Oh yeah. Whoever wrote that, my heart goes out to you because that I have seen that. And yeah, it's on top of the grief, then dealing with relatives who are only thinking about their own, financial gains. Just, yeah, it just feels, um, yeah, awful, basically. And I think that it's kind of one of those situations, is it knowing that, like, are you able to keep the things that are meaningful to you and focusing on that? Like, what are you able to control and keep for you? And just knowing that, like, yeah, karma. That's all I can say. Karma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is such a painful situation, right? And I think that reflects the reality of it can feel like this additional unfairness when you're already experiencing loss and pain and grief. And that's why I always want to say, like, we can always grieve this too,
Mhm.
right? We can also grieve that, oh, people are acting in a way that really surprised me, or maybe
Mhm.
didn't surprise us, right? Maybe they're acting the way they've always acted. We can also grieve that. And I also like to say that with curating grief, you don't actually need the belongings and the meaningful objects to curate or to have that connection to your person. That when I talk about the meaningful objects and the belongings, they can be really helpful as these tangible items that help us to access the intangible, that help us to be like linking objects, as research calls it, to help us to feel connected to our person. And you don't need the actual pieces. Yes, maybe there's like an extra, like, oh, pang of like, oh my God, my mom touched this. And I know that if I lost everything, that I still have my mother's, I wouldn't lose her.
Mhm. Yeah.
I wouldn't lose the memories that are attached. I wouldn't lose the stories. I wouldn't lose the aspects of her that I want to remember and spotlight. I have lost items of hers, and it hurts like hell. So it's like, okay, we can experience that hurt, we can grieve it, we can feel angry, we can feel righteous. And I think we would feel that right alongside you.
Mhm.
And when you're ready, I'd like to explore, what is it that you wish you had?
Yeah.
What does that represent to you? What does it help you to feel connected to? And then what else helps you to access that, to keep that?
Mhm.
Is it a necklace that reminds you of the necklace that you wish you had? Is it a piece of furniture that is reminiscent of the one that, your jerk of a cousin sold at a garage sale and didn't even tell you about? It's like, okay, we can grieve not having the piece and look at what we're really trying to hold on to, what we're really trying to access.
I love that. I really love that. And that, I think it is, especially in the early days and years of grief, the objects can sometimes feel that much more um, important, or like vibratory. You know what I mean? Like it feels like there's the meaning just feels so strong in the objects. And then as time goes by, that can shift. And something that we'll often do is create like a letting go journal. So as we let go of things, we'll maybe just write it down in the journal of, like, these are the things I let go of, so that you can go back to remember them without having them. Because I think that there's often this concern that if I let go, then I'm letting go of the memory, I'm letting go of the person. So we'll keep a lot to remember, but then we will keep so much that it's almost like, as I talked about the open tabs, it's almost the opposite experience of what I shared earlier, of going to my friend's house who had 5 things, and it was so powerful. Those 5 things were just so powerful, so that it's the the items that you choose to keep, or the memories that you choose to keep, versus keeping it all, or keeping so much that you can't manage it. Because that's what what happens is, our belongings can become comforting, and then they can switch into overwhelming, suffocating, stagnating. So it's always in a home, that balance. And when there's objects that are related to grief, it's even that much more intense that way.
Yes. Thank you for naming that. And there was also a question about your explanation about the mistake of focusing on the past versus on the future or the present. My difficulty is that I was raised to assume the responsibility to communicate my family's/community's past to the future generations. I like the idea of curating. It relieves me of the clutter I've been bequeathed with an eye toward educating future generations. I definitely have a thought about that. Tinka, if that brings up anything for you.
Well, it's interesting because my mom always says that she feels like she became the family historian. And so she has all from two very large families, and there's history there that's related to like a family legacy around skiing. So my grandfather was one of the first people to bring skiing to North America. Yes, and so there's a lot of like the history that, around that. So my mom has all these archives that people are constantly, so, sort of finding where to bequeath them, museum, all of that kind of thing. But I think that she can feel this overwhelm of needing to make sure that she's passing along the past, and not just about my grandfather, my grandmother, but about just the skiing in general. I mean, anyway, that's just an example. But I think that what happens is often we have these, all of a sudden we're playing these roles as like a family archivist, a family archaeologist, a family, librarian, a family storage unit. Like we can then all of a sudden have all these, and the family legacy maker. So I just love the what was just shared in the chat about that, because that is a very, very real situation that people can find themselves in, and this responsibility of how do I make sure that when I'm no longer here, how do I make sure that these items continue, to resonate and be passed along. So
Yeah. One of my favorite parts in my book is about the roles that we play. That you named, like your mother was like became the historian. I feel like my mom became the family archivist. In her house was things from my grandmother and then things from my great aunt when she died. And so it's like excavating as well. When you go through someone's things, you're like, oh my God. And then there are my grandfather's things too. So when we think about what role we play, do you find yourself in the role of archaeologist,
mhm.
where you're just unearthing things?
Yeah.
And the reason why I love using this lens of being a curator is a curator chooses. A curator chooses what goes into a collection, whereas an archaeologist, actually, you're supposed to keep everything you find in an archaeology dig, right? That's part of their remit. Everything has to be
I should have
logged.
I should have been an archaeologist. I'm in like the wrong profession. Keep it all. Joke.
if if we have like endless resources, right? I'm like, well, but you keep all those artifacts and like shards of pottery, and then we have to store it in temperature controlled storage, and then we have to make sure it doesn't flood, and we have to make sure it's, documented and tagged, and when we move it into a display, now we have to track that. There's so much else that goes into keeping items. And I think that's the kind of lens that I want to offer to people who are struggling with, oh my God, I need to keep it all. Or even an example of this person saying, I was raised to keep things for future generations. You are not actually a museum.
Way of putting it. Yeah, you are not a storage unit. You are not a museum.
You are not running the Smithsonian. You are not running the British Museum. You do not actually have some huge responsibility to the future humanity. Yes, there are parts of us as grievers who might want to say, no, I want people to know about my mother, right? I want people to know about my partner, about my father, about my sibling. I want people to know about them. And you are not a major museum that is required to keep everything for everyone's access and the knowledge of the humankind. So I would like to pull it back to be like, okay, what is our role here? What is our responsibility?
That's so good. That's such a good distinction. And I think that there's also, I feel like curating, it has a very active element to it, and a very intentional element to it, where, it's again, like there's a quote that, our home is living space, not storage space. And so it's the same thing. The curating is curating the living, versus the archaeologist is storing the past. So, I mean, when I mean curating the living, I mean that can be related to the person you've lost, but it's like, how do you curate then what you're choosing to pass along.
Yes. And you mentioned stories as well, because I think that's something that people miss, especially when we keep items for other people. Even when you go through a museum that has decided what they're keeping, there's a label next to the item that explains the significance of the item, why it was important, and anything that might explain why it's relevant to the person who is visiting and looking at the item. And that's a step that often people miss, right? When we keep items for other people and we think, oh, they're going to love this item from their grandfather. And we've never actually communicated, like, why is it important? And actually, once we start doing that, we realize it's so much work.
It is so much work. It's something that, my mom has started to do. It's very painful for me to watch her do it. She's been my really only parent my whole life, but she's now in her early 80s, and so she started to leave little post-it notes under objects in the house with their stories, or this idea of you can sort of do little videos and walk around and narrate, that there are ways to do it that I think can be a way of the curating in advance. So yeah, I think that what can happen is that you'll end up with all this stuff, these family photos. We don't know anyone in the photo, or like not knowing the history and then feeling the guilt of why didn't I ask? Or I wish I had been able to talk about this and now no one knows who they are. And, so it's sort of all these things that can then happen with what we're left behind with. So that when you have that lens of just being like, okay, well, I don't know who these photos are, but I do know these ones, so I'm going to keep these ones, right? I'm going to keep the ones that I have the personal connection to. And yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. I loved our conversation today. Is there anything that we didn't get to, Tinka, that you kind of want to leave people with?
I just want to leave everyone with that this is probably one of the hardest things that we do in our life is go through belongings of the people that we love and care about who are no longer here with us. And just know that, like, grief to me, I like the phrase grief is love evolving, and that in the going through the items that it is can be very, very helpful as a way to have that love shift and change and your own life shift and change. And that, like, there's no timeline, there's no number of years. I mean, for me, I'm approaching my dad's 35th or we've just passed his 35th anniversary of when he passed away. And as we know, it can sometimes still feel like so recent. And it can feel both recent and long, and that just the community of grievers is a beautiful community. I'm so grateful to have been able to talk today with you, Charlene. We all speak the language of grief and loss, and that it's so hard, and yet there's so much that we all learn. And I think that our hearts can very much expand with loss. So I think that's the last thing I want to say, is that I think that we can experience an expansiveness of love and of life, amidst the loss that we go through. So that's what I wanted to say. And just, I really loved talking to you. So thank you, Charlene, very much.
Thank you, Tinka. And I love that we can close with that visual too of we've talked about space today, reclaiming space, but to be able to hold that notion of, oh, what if we can actually have more space in the way that loss, even though it's potentially so painful, can actually give us more space in our hearts, in our spirits, in our lives. So thank you for that offering of that vision too. If you want to find out more about what we do, my Sorting the Stuff of Life and Loss course, which is about looking at, all the meanings and what might be attached to the items that make it feel hard for us to make some of these decisions. Tinka's work and the Home Lab, which is her monthly membership, where you too can get her looking at your space through Zoom during our co-working, and her expertise and all the ways she works with people. Anything else, Tinka, in terms of how people can find out more about you or any other resources?
Just yes, like my monthly membership is basically we meet 3 times a month and we have co-working and different workshops, and it's just a very supportive, warm space. So I'm open to everyone, and I'd love for people to come and participate. It's a very unique community offering around working on our homes together, not doing it alone.
Yeah, you are so not alone. If what you've heard today has you feeling like at least a little less alone, again, you are not crazy for crying over the random things or finding it difficult. And you are all curators. So we're all curators, and yes, we can do this. So do reach out to us if you would like that support. And otherwise, thank you for being here today. So much love to you wherever you are, physical space, grief space.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with chaos counselor Tinka Markham Piper. Thanks for tuning in to the Curating Grief Show. You can find out more about Tinka at solvemyspace.com. That's solvemyspace.com. To find out more about her home lab and the ways that she works with people as a chaos counselor. To find out more about Curating Grief, you can visit curatinggrief.com. To learn more about the Sorting the Stuff of Life and Loss course or my Curating Grief book.